Far from Earth, deep in the center of the galaxy, the Galactic Dominion gathered for a celebration. The council chamber was enormous. It floated above a bright blue star that burned like a giant torch in space. Through the massive glass walls, the star's light filled the chamber with a cold glow. Inside the chamber, thousands of alien leaders sat in long rows. Some were tall and covered in shining armor. Some were small and thin with glowing eyes. Others were machine minds that floated quietly in the air. All of them ruled powerful empires, and all of them were celebrating. Music echoed across the chamber. Strange instruments played deep and powerful sounds. Alien drinks flowed freely as servants moved between the tables. War banners hung from the tall walls. Every banner showed the same symbol, the symbol of the Galactic Dominion. For thousands of years, the Dominion had ruled the galaxy. They had crushed powerful empires. They had destroyed species that refused to obey. Entire civilizations had disappeared after challenging them. No one could remember the last time the Dominion lost a war. Tonight, they believed they were celebrating another victory. But the strange part was this. The war had not even begun yet. At the center of the chamber, a massive hologram slowly turned in the air. It showed a small blue planet, Earth. Compared to the massive empires of the Dominion, Earth looks tiny, fragile, unimportant. One of the alien commanders leaned forward and studied the image with amusement. "So, this is the famous human homeworld," he said. His voice echoed across the chamber. Several other commanders laughed. Humans were not respected in the galaxy. They were known for many things, but strength was not one of them. Humans were described in the Dominion archives as young, divided, emotional, unpredictable. Their governments often disagreed with each other. Their leaders argued constantly, and their history was full of internal wars. To the Dominion, this made humanity weak. One machine intelligence floating near the council table spoke calmly. Human civilization reached interstellar travel only recently. Their expansion is limited. Their fleets are small compared to Dominion standards. A tall reptilian warlord nodded. "Yes, they are still learning how the galaxy works." Another commander laughed loudly. "They are barely a spacefaring species." The chamber filled with quiet amusement. The Dominion had conquered hundreds of worlds stronger than humanity. Compared to those ancient civilizations, humans looked like beginners. That was why the Dominion War Council had made a simple decision. Human space would be absorbed. Their fleets would be dismantled. Earth would become another colony under Dominion control. To the Council, it was not even considered a war. It was simply expansion, a routine operation. One Dominion admiral stood slowly from his seat. His armor reflected the light of the blue star outside the chamber. He lifted a shining glass filled with glowing liquid. "Friends," he said proudly, "tonight we celebrate the next chapter of Dominion history." The chamber grew quiet. All eyes turned toward him. "The human system will fall before the next solar cycle," the admiral continued. "They are not prepared for the reality of the galaxy." He raised the glass higher. "Congratulations, everyone. Humanity will soon belong to the Dominion." For a moment there was silence. Then the entire chamber erupted in cheers. Glasses were raised. Music grew louder. Some commanders laughed openly. Others began discussing how human worlds would be divided among their empires. To them, the outcome was already decided. The war had been won before the first shot was fired. But far away from the celebration, something strange was happening. Dominion scout ships had already entered the outer edge of human space. Their mission was simple: observe human reactions, record military activity, prepare the path for the main invasion fleet. The scouts expected chaos, human emergency signals, fleet movements, defensive formations, but instead, they found something unexpected: silence, complete silence. One Dominion scout captain stared at his sensor screen in confusion. "This cannot be correct," he muttered. His ship moved deeper into the region. Still nothing. No distress signals. No defensive fleets. No Abentivi protests. Human trade routes were empty. Stations that should have been busy were dark. Even the major shipping lanes showed no movement. It looked as if human civilization had simply disappeared. The captain sent a report back to the Dominion command. At first, the council believed humans were hiding. Fear was common when the Dominion arrived. Many species panicked. Many tried to escape. But as more scout reports arrived, the situation became stranger. Human shipyards were completely empty. Massive construction platforms floated quietly with no ships docked. Factories that once built human warships were silent. Thousands of vessels that should have been there were gone. A young Dominion sensor officer studied the reports carefully. He was not a commander. He had no voice in the council. But something about the data made him uncomfortable. He slowly approached one of the Dominion admirals. "Commander," he said carefully, "there is something unusual in the human systems." The admiral looked annoyed. "What is it?" The officer showed the sensor data. "All known human fleets are missing." The admiral waved a hand dismissively. "Of course they are missing. They are running away." Several commanders nearby laughed. "Yes," one of them said. "Humans are afraid. They know they cannot fight the Dominion." The young officer nodded slowly, but his eyes returned to the sensor screen. Something else had appeared, something far away, deep in the darkness beyond the human systems. A signal, large, extremely large. At first, he thought it was a sensor error, but the signal continued growing. More readings appeared, mass readings, energy signatures, movement patterns. The officer's breathing slowed. He adjusted the scanner again. Then again, the results did not change. Whatever it was massive, and it was moving fast. The officer spoke quietly. "Commander, there is something else." The admiral sighed impatiently. "What now?" The officer zoomed the scanner view outward. The deep space display filled with movement. Not one signal, not 10, hundreds, maybe thousands. Ships, large ships, very large ships, all moving in one direction, toward the Dominion scout fleets. The young officer swallowed slowly. "Commander, these ships, they are human." The admiral stared at the screen. For the first time that night, the laughter stopped. Because the human fleets were not hiding. They were not running. They were not afraid. They were coming. For several seconds, the Dominion command bridge was completely silent. The massive scanner screen filled the front wall of the room. Hundreds of glowing signals moved slowly across the dark map of space. Every signal represented a ship. Human ships. The young sensor officer stared at the screen again to make sure he was not mistaken, but the reading stayed the same. More signals appeared every second. Large ships, medium ships, and something even bigger behind them. The Dominion admiral stepped closer to the display. His expression slowly changed. This was not what he expected. "Identify the fleet formations," he ordered. The sensor officer began working quickly. His hands moved across the control panel as new information appeared on the screen. "Commander, these ships are not scattered," he said. "They are organized, very organized." Several Dominion officers looked at the display carefully. The ships were moving in precise lines, perfect formations. Groups of ships protected larger vessels in the center. It looked like a fleet prepared for battle, not a group of ships running away. One of the Dominion captains frowned. "This is impossible," he said quietly. "Human fleets are not this large." Another officer nodded. "Their military records show only a few hundred combat ships." The admiral crossed his arms and stared at the screen. "But this fleet," the sensor officer answered softly, "this fleet is much larger." He zoomed the scanner outward. The room grew even quieter. Because the fleet did not end. More human ships were still appearing. From behind distant moons, from hidden points near asteroid belts, from deep space jump zones. The Dominion officers slowly realized something disturbing. These ships had been waiting, hidden, prepared. One of the commanders spoke carefully. "Perhaps these are civilian vessels converted into warships." But the sensors quickly proved that idea wrong. "These are not civilian ships," the sensor officer reported. "They are military designs, heavily armored, advanced energy shields, multiple weapon systems." The officer paused. Then he added something that made the entire room uneasy. "Some of these ships are larger than Dominion battlecruisers." The admiral's eyes narrowed. That should not be possible. Human shipyards were small. Their technology was still developing. How could they build ships this large? Another sensor warning suddenly flashed. More signals appeared behind the first human fleet. The officers zoomed out again, and again, and again. The map continued expanding, each time revealing more ships. The Dominion officers slowly began to understand something terrifying. The human fleet they were seeing was only the front line. The real fleet was still arriving. Deep space rippled with jump signals. Large human carriers appeared first, then heavy warships, then long lines of escort ships. They arrived silently, calmly, like soldiers taking their places before a battle. One Dominion commander finally spoke the question everyone was thinking. How long have they been preparing this? No one answered. because the answer was beginning to become clear. Humans had known. Somehow they had known the Dominion would come, and they had prepared for it. The Dominion admiral finally straightened his posture. "Signal the main invasion fleet," he ordered. "Tell them to advance immediately. Human resistance will be stronger than expected." Within minutes, the massive Dominion armada began moving deeper into the system. Thousands of warships accelerated forward. Their engines burned bright against the darkness of space. For centuries, this fleet had crushed every enemy that stood against it. No species had ever survived their first encounter with the Dominion war fleets. The Dominion commanders believed this battle would end the same way. But as the fleets moved closer, something strange became clear. The human ships were not charging forward. They were not firing. They were not retreating either. They were simply waiting. The human fleet held its position near the outer regions of the solar system. Ships slowly shifted into new formations. Lines of warships spread out across millions of kilometers. Large carriers moved to the center. Heavy cruisers guarded the edges. Scout vessels moved quietly through the darkness. The movements were calm, precise, controlled. One Dominion officer looked confused. "Why are they waiting?" The admiral studied the formation carefully. "They are not waiting," he said slowly. "They are positioning." The officer frowned. "For what?" The admiral did not answer. Because something about the human movements felt strange. Human fleets were supposed to be chaotic. Their species was emotional, unpredictable. But the ships on the screen moved with perfect discipline. Every maneuver looked planned. Every ship held its position exactly. It looked less like a fleet and more like a carefully designed machine. Then another sensor alert appeared. The young officer leaned forward again. "Commander, more ships just arrived." "Where?" "Behind the first human line." The screen zoomed in. New human vessels appeared from deep space. But these ships looked different. They were enormous. Long black holes covered with thick armor plates. Their engines burned with deep blue energy, and their power signatures were unlike anything the Dominion had seen before. The sensor officer checked the readings again. His voice became quieter. "These ships have power outputs larger than Dominion fortress vessels." The Dominion officers stared at the screen. The ships were massive, too massive. One of the commanders whispered, "What kind of ships are those?" No one had an answer, because the Dominion databases had never recorded human ships like this. The young sensor officer swallowed slowly. "Commander, the human fleet is still growing." The admiral slowly exhaled. For the first time that night, he began to feel something unusual, not fear, but uncertainty. The Dominion fleet had come expecting a simple conquest, but now the battlefield looked very different. Thousands of human ships waited silently in the darkness, perfectly organized, perfectly calm, like predators waiting for the right moment. The Dominion admiral looked one more time at the approaching fleets. Then he gave the order. "All ships prepare weapons. Begin battle formation." Across the Dominion armada, thousands of weapons powered up. Massive cannons rotated toward the human lines. Missile bays opened. Energy cores glowed brighter. The greatest fleet in the galaxy prepared to begin the war. But on the human side, the ships remained perfectly still. No weapons fired. No panic signals appeared. No retreat orders were given. Instead, the human fleet slowly shifted again, expanding across the empty space, forming strange patterns that the Dominion scanners could not fully understand. The young sensor officer looked at the screen one more time, and this time, something about the pattern made his stomach tighten, because the human ships were not forming defensive lines. They were forming something else, something much more dangerous. They were building a trap. The distance between the two fleets slowly disappeared. On one side of the battlefield, the Dominion armada advanced with full power. Thousands of warships moved forward like a massive metal storm. On the other side, the human fleet waited in silence. Stars burned quietly around them. Cold space stretched for millions of kilometers, and between the two fleets, war was about to begin. Inside the Dominion flagship, tension filled the command bridge. Officers stood at their stations, watching the human fleet formations carefully. The young sensor officer could not stop staring at the display. Something about the human position still felt wrong. The ships were spread across a wide area, too wide for a normal defense. It looked messy at first, but when he zoomed the scanner outward, the pattern slowly appeared. The human ships were forming layers, large ships in the center, fast ships on the edges, small objects drifting between them. The officer frowned. Commander, there are objects between the human ships. The admiral looked over. What kind of objects? The officer ran another scan. They are small, very small, too small to be ships. Possibly mines. Several officers laughed. Mines, Nath, that is primitive. The Dominion Navy rarely used mines. Their technology was powerful enough to destroy fleets directly, but the human formations continued spreading. The strange objects slowly drifted through space, hundreds of them, then thousands, then tens of thousands. The Dominion admiral watched silently for a moment. Then he gave the order. Advance through them. The Dominion fleet pushed forward. Warships accelerated as they closed the final distance. Massive engines burned with bright energy. Soon the two fleets were only minutes away from battle. And then, the first Dominion ship crossed the invisible line. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then space suddenly twisted. The mine activated. A strange pulse spread across the battlefield. Gravity itself bent violently. The Dominion cruiser that triggered the mine was pulled sideways. Its engines roared as the ship tried to correct its path. But another mine activated nearby, then another, and another. Within seconds, hundreds of gravity mines exploded into life. Invisible forces ripped through the battlefield. Dominion ships began drifting out of formation. Some were pulled forward, others spun violently to the side. Two destroyers slammed into each other with a massive explosion. The Dominion fleet had expected weapons, but they had not expected space itself to attack them. Stabilize formation, the admiral shouted. But it was already too late. The carefully organized Dominion armada was breaking apart. Ships struggled to maintain control. Navigation systems screamed warnings. Engines fought against invisible gravity currents. The battlefield turned chaotic, and that was the moment the human fleet moved. Human warships accelerated forward, not wildly, not emotionally, but with perfect timing. The front line of human cruisers opened fire. Bright beams of energy shot across space. Dominion ships, already struggling with gravity distortion, could not react quickly. The first cruiser exploded, then another. Human ships moved like hunters surrounding prey. Groups of 3 ships focused their fire on single targets. Dominion vessels vanished one by one. The Dominion fleet tried to respond. Weapons fired across space. Massive plasma beams burned through the darkness. Some human ships were hit. Several exploded into bright flashes. But the humans did not panic. Their formations adjusted instantly. Damaged ships were pulled back. Fresh ships replaced them. The battle continued like a carefully controlled machine. Inside the Dominion flagship, officers shouted new commands. Break the human line. Destroy the minefields. Push through. Heavy Dominion battleships fired powerful weapons that cleared some of the gravity mines. But every time they opened a path, more mines activated. The battlefield continued twisting with dangerous gravitational waves. The young sensor officer stared at the display in disbelief. This is impossible, he whispered. The admiral looked at him sharply. Explain. The officer swallowed. These mines, they are not random. They are placed in mathematical patterns. The admiral looked back at the battlefield. The human fleet movement suddenly made sense. The humans had built an entire battlefield designed to destroy the Dominion formations. Every mine, every ship position, every attack. All part of a giant trap. One Dominion captain spoke quietly. They are controlling the battlefield. They are controlling the battlefield. The admiral slowly realized the truth. Humans were not fighting like warriors. They were fighting like engineers. They had built the battlefield itself. Dominion ships tried to push forward again, but the gravity distortions kept pulling them apart. Human ships used the chaos perfectly. Fast attack ships darted through the broken formations. Heavy cruisers delivered powerful strikes. Dominion ships exploded across space. One by one, another alarm suddenly rang on the bridge. Commander, the sensor officer shouted. The admiral turned sharply. What is it now? More human ships are arriving. The screen zoomed out again. New signals appeared on the edge of the battlefield, but these ships were different. They were larger than the others, much larger. Long, dark hulls moved slowly into position. Their energy signatures were enormous. The young officer stared at the readings. His voice became quiet again. Commander, those ships, they are not normal warships. The admiral narrowed his eyes. Then what are they? The officer looked back at the screen. The massive ships slowly formed a new line behind the main human fleet. Their power systems began charging. The energy readings kept rising, higher, 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 until the scanners could barely measure them. The young officer whispered the words that no Dominion commander had ever expected to hear. "Commander, I believe those are super capital ships." The admiral felt the cold weight of realization settle in his chest. The Dominion had not prepared for ships like these. The humans had more than fleets. They had built weapons designed for wars on a galactic scale, and now those weapons were about to fire. Across the battlefield, the giant human ships slowly aimed their massive cannons. Energy gathered along their enormous weapon arrays. The Dominion fleet was still struggling inside the gravity trap. Ships scattered, formations broken, engines fighting against twisted space. Perfect targets. The young sensor officer whispered one final sentence. "Commander, I think we attacked the wrong species." The battlefield had turned into chaos. Dominion warships drifted through twisted gravity fields, their engines screaming as they tried to escape the invisible forces pulling them apart. What had once been a perfect invasion armada was now a scattered collection of ships fighting just to stay in control. Inside the Dominion flagship, warning lights flashed across every console. Officers shouted reports over each other. Engine failure on the left-wing fleet. Destroyers 44 through 52 lost. Gravity distortion increasing. The admiral stood in the center of the bridge, watching the battlefield unfold on the massive display. For the first time in centuries, the Dominion fleet was losing control of a battle, and it had happened in minutes. Across the dark battlefield, the massive human supercapital ships slowly moved into position. They were enormous. Long armored hulls stretched across kilometers of space. Their surfaces were covered with weapon systems, shield generators, and strange energy devices the Dominion scanners struggled to understand. Bright blue energy slowly gathered along their main cannons. The energy levels continued rising. The young Dominion sensor officer stared at the readings with growing fear. "Commander, their power output keeps increasing." "How much?" the admiral asked. The officer checked again, then again. His voice became quiet. "More than our fortress ships." That answer sent a cold silence across the bridge. Fortress ships were the largest weapons the Dominion had ever built. Entire planets had surrendered after seeing them. But these human ships, they were even stronger. The admiral watched as the massive cannons finally fired. A single beam of brilliant blue energy exploded across space. It crossed the battlefield in seconds. One Dominion battleship was caught directly in the beam. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the battleship simply disappeared. Its shields collapsed instantly. Its armor melted like ice under sunlight. The entire ship broke apart into glowing debris. The bridge fell silent. Another beam fired. Another Dominion cruiser vanished. Then another. The human supercapital ships fired again and again, each blast destroying one of the Dominion's largest vessels. They were not firing randomly. They were targeting the most important ships. Command vessels, heavy carriers, long-range weapon platforms. Within minutes, the leadership of the Dominion fleet began collapsing. The young officer whispered in disbelief, "They are removing our command structure." The admiral slowly nodded. Yes, the humans had studied Dominion warfare carefully. They knew exactly which ships controlled the fleet. Destroy the commanders. Break the coordination. Leave the rest of the ships confused and alone. It was a simple strategy, but it was devastating. Across the battlefield, the Dominion fleet began to break apart completely. Ships tried to escape the gravity fields. Others tried to regroup, but human attack ships moved quickly through the chaos. Small, fast vessels darted between the broken Dominion formations. They fired precise bursts of energy at weakened ships. Dominion destroyers exploded one after another. Even the largest Dominion cruisers could not turn quickly enough to defend themselves. The battle had turned into a hunt, and the humans were the hunters. Inside the flagship, another officer stepped forward. "Commander, we must retreat." The admiral did not answer immediately. Retreat. That word had almost never been spoken in Dominion history. For thousands of years, the Dominion had been the strongest force in the galaxy. Every enemy eventually collapsed. But now the situation was different. The admiral looked at the display again. Human ships continued moving with calm precision. No panic, no wasted movements. They looked like a massive machine slowly dismantling the Dominion fleet. One Dominion captain spoke quietly. "How did we not see this coming?" The admiral finally answered. Because we underestimated them. The young censor officer listened carefully. The admiral continued speaking. We studied human politics. We studied human politics. We studied their history. We saw their internal conflicts. But we misunderstood something important. The officer looked up. What did we misunderstand? The admiral pointed toward the screen where the human fleet moved in perfect coordination. We thought humans were divided. We thought their arguments made them weak. He paused. But what if those arguments made them stronger? The bridge fell quiet again. Human history was full of conflict, wars, disagreements, competition. But maybe those struggles had forced humanity to improve faster, to innovate, to prepare, to survive. The Dominion had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They had grown powerful, but they had also grown comfortable, predictable. Humans, on the other hand, had spent centuries preparing for dangers that might never come. And now that preparation was saving them. Another explosion flashed across the battlefield. A Dominion carrier broke apart under concentrated human fire. The fleet losses continued rising. The admiral finally spoke again. Signal the fleet. All ships begin emergency withdrawal. Several officers froze. Commander, retreat. Yes. His voice remained calm. We came here expecting a simple conquest. But this is not a conquest. This is a war. And the Dominion was not ready for it. Across the battlefield, Dominion ships slowly began turning away. Engines burned brighter as they tried to escape the gravity traps. Some ships managed to break free. Others were destroyed before they could move. Human ships continued their attacks but did not rush forward. They advanced carefully, methodically, almost as if they were allowing some Dominion ships to escape. The young censor officer watched the retreat slowly begin. Then he noticed something unusual. Commander? The admiral looked over. What is it? The human fleet is not pursuing aggressively. The admiral studied the screen. The officer was correct. Human ships were advancing slowly, but they were not chasing the fleeing Dominion vessels. It looked almost like they were sending a message. The admiral understood immediately. They want survivors. The officer blinked. Why? So the galaxy will hear what happened here. The Dominion had arrived expecting victory. Instead, they had found something very different. A species that had prepared quietly for decades. A species that did not panic when threatened. A species that had turned the battlefield itself into a weapon. The admiral stared one last time at the human fleet, and he realized something that would change the galaxy forever. The Dominion had not attacked a weak civilization. They had attacked a species that had been preparing for this moment their entire history. And now the galaxy was about to learn a new truth. Humanity was not the weakest species in the galaxy. It might be the most dangerous. The battlefield was filled with drifting wreckage. Broken Dominion ships floated slowly through space, their hulls torn apart by explosions and gravity waves. Small fires burned across the dark metal as debris spread across millions of kilometers. What had once been the most powerful invasion fleet in the galaxy was now shattered. Dominion ships were retreating. Engines burned with desperate energy as the surviving vessels tried to escape the battlefield. Inside the Dominion flagship, the command bridge was no longer loud with confident voices. Now it was filled with quiet tension. The admiral stood in silence as reports continued arriving. Commander, we lost the third battle group. Commander, the heavy carrier Iron Talon has been destroyed. Commander, multiple ships unable to jump due to gravity damage. Every new report showed the same truth. The Dominion fleet had been defeated, but the battle was not finished yet, because the human fleet was moving forward. Across the battlefield, human warships slowly advanced through the broken Dominion formations. They did not rush. They did not scatter. They moved in perfect order. Large cruisers pushed forward first, their powerful shields glowing softly. Behind them, carriers released hundreds of smaller strike craft. Thousands of human fighters poured into space like swarms of metal birds. The Dominion ships that had not yet escaped suddenly found themselves surrounded. Inside one damaged Dominion destroyer, the captain watched the approaching fighters on his scanner. They're everywhere, he whispered. Human strike craft were small but extremely fast. They moved between the broken Dominion ships with terrifying speed. Their weapons were precise. Short bursts of energy cut through engines, weapon systems, and shield generators. Instead of destroying ships instantly, many human attacks disabled them. One by one, Dominion ships lost power, weapons went dark, engines shut down. The ships drifted helplessly in space. The Dominion captain realized something disturbing. Why aren't they destroying us? But before anyone could answer, his destroyer's engines suddenly failed. The ship went silent. Outside, a human cruiser slowly passed nearby. The cruiser did not fire. It simply scanned the disabled ship and continued forward. Across the battlefield, similar scenes happened again and again. Human ships were not only destroying Dominion vessels, they were capturing them. Inside the Dominion flagship, the young sensor officer noticed this pattern. "Commander, the humans are leaving many ships intact." The admiral nodded slowly. "Yes, but why?" the officer asked. The admiral looked back at the battlefield. "Because information is valuable. Humans will study our technology. They will learn everything they can." He paused before speaking again, "And then they will become even stronger." Another explosion flashed across the display. A Dominion cruiser that had tried to fire one last weapon was instantly destroyed by 3 human warships working together. The battle had clearly changed. This was no longer a chaotic fight. This was now a controlled operation. Human fleets moved across the battlefield like careful surgeons. They removed dangerous ships, disabled others, captured the rest. It was precise, efficient, and terrifying. Then a new signal appeared on the scanner. The young officer leaned forward. "Commander, something else is arriving." "More human ships?" "No, larger ones." The screen zoomed outward again. From the far side of the solar system, enormous shapes began emerging from hyperspace. These ships were far larger than anything already on the battlefield. Their hulls stretched for kilometers. Massive shield generators surrounded them with glowing blue barriers, and along their sides were rows of enormous weapon cannons. The young officer stared at the readings. "These ships are bigger than our fortress stations." The admiral narrowed his eyes. "What are they?" Before anyone could answer, the human fleet changed formation again. Human warships slowly moved aside. They created a wide path through the battlefield, almost like soldiers stepping aside for something important. The massive ships slowly moved forward through the opening. Their engines glowed with deep blue energy, the officer whispered. "They're command ships." The admiral shook his head. "No, they're something else." Because these ships were not designed for battles alone. They looked like moving fortresses, cities built for war. Entire fleets could operate from them. The Dominion database had no record of ships like these. Then a signal suddenly appeared on the Dominion communication system, an unknown transmission. Every Dominion ship received the same message. The bridge officers looked at the admiral. "Commander, the message is from the human fleet." The admiral hesitated for a moment. Then he nodded. "Play it." The screen changed. A human face appeared. The man wore a dark military uniform. His expression was calm, not angry, not excited, just calm. "I am Admiral Elias Carter of the United Human Defense Fleet." His voice echoed through the bridge. "You entered human space without permission. You prepared to destroy our worlds." The human admiral paused. "But you underestimated us." The Dominion admiral watched quietly. The human continued. "For centuries, humanity studied the galaxy. We watched powerful empires rise. We watched them fall. And we learned something important." He leaned slightly forward. "Strength alone does not win wars. Preparation does." Behind him, the massive human fleets filled the background, thousands of ships waiting silently. "You believed humanity was weak. You believed our divisions made us fragile, but you misunderstood our species. Humans argue, humans compete, humans potate, hymns fight." His voice became slightly stronger. "But when an outside threat appears, humanity becomes one." The Dominion bridge was completely silent. The human admiral finished his message calmly. "This battle is over. You may leave our system, but understand this clearly. If the Dominion returns, humanity will not stop at defense." The message ended. The screen returned to the battlefield view. The Dominion admiral slowly exhaled. The humans had given them a choice: retreat or be destroyed. Across the battlefield, the massive human fortress ships continued advancing, weapons fully charged, thousands of warships ready behind them. The message was clear. The Dominion invasion had failed, and if the battle continued, the Dominion fleet would not survive. The battlefield slowly grew quiet. The explosions had stopped. Weapons that had filled space with light and destruction only hours before were now silent. Broken ships drifted slowly between the stars. Some Dominion vessels floated without power. Others moved carefully away from the battlefield, their engines weak but still working. The great Dominion invasion had ended, and it had ended in defeat. Inside the Dominion flagship, the command bridge felt very different than it had at the beginning of the battle. Earlier, the officers had stood proudly. They had spoken about victory. They had laughed at humanity. Now the room was silent. The Dominion admirals stared at the main display where the human fleet still waited. Thousands of human ships held their positions across the battlefield. They did not chase the retreating Dominion vessels. They did not fire another shot. They simply watched. Calm, disciplined, prepared. The admiral understood the message clearly. Humanity had already proven its strength. There was no need to prove it again. One Dominion officer spoke quietly. "Commander, the remaining ships are requesting permission to jump to hyperspace." The admiral looked around the bridge. Many ships had already escaped. Many others had been destroyed. What remained was only a small part of the once unstoppable Dominion armada. He nodded slowly. "Authorize the retreat." Across the fleet, Dominion ships began opening hyperspace gates. Bright blue portals appeared across the dark battlefield. One by one, the surviving vessels jumped away. The Dominion had come expecting conquest. Instead, they were leaving in silence. As the last ships prepared to jump, the young censor officer looked back at the human fleet. Something about them still felt strange. "Commander," he said carefully. "Yes?" The admiral replied. "The humans are still watching us." The admiral nodded. "Yes, but they are not attacking." The admiral nodded. "Yes, but they are not attacking." The admiral folded his arms. "They don't need to." The officer looked confused. "What do you mean?" The admiral pointed toward the battlefield. "Look carefully." The officer zoomed the sensors outward. Beyond the battlefield, beyond the broken ships and drifting debris, something else appeared. More human fleets. Far more. Hidden behind planets. Hidden in deep space. Hidden near distant jump points. Thousands more ships that had not even entered the battle. The officer felt a cold chill. They had even more forces. "Yes," the admiral said quietly. "They were ready for something much worse." The officer looked back at the human ships. "So why didn't they use them?" The admiral answered slowly. "Because they didn't need to." That was the most terrifying truth of all. The Dominion had attacked with one of the largest fleets in the galaxy, and humanity had defeated it without even using all their strength. The final Dominion ship opened its hyperspace gate. Just before the flagship jumped away, the admiral took one last look at the human fleet. For the first time in many centuries, the Dominion commander felt something he had not expected. Respect. Humanity had not attacked fleeing ships. They had not hunted down the survivors. They had simply defended their home. The flagship jumped into hyperspace. The battlefield was left behind. Only the human fleet remained. For several minutes, the human ships stayed in position, scanning the surrounding space, watching carefully. Finally, the massive fortress ships slowly powered down their main weapons. Human cruisers moved through the battlefield collecting survivors and disabled ships. Human recovery vessels began gathering wreckage. The battle was finished, but its impact would reach far beyond the Sol system. Because across the galaxy, hundreds of civilizations had been watching. Long-range observation stations, hidden probes, trade vessels passing nearby. News of the battle spread quickly, first to nearby systems, then to the outer empires, then to the very center of the galaxy. The message was simple. The Dominion had attacked humanity, and the Dominion had lost. Many alien leaders could not believe the reports at first. The Dominion had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. No one defeated them. But the battle recordings were clear. Human fleets had outmaneuvered the Dominion. Human weapons had destroyed their strongest ships. Human strategy had turned the battlefield itself into a trap. And most surprising of all, humanity had shown restraint. They had allowed the Dominion to leave. They had not chased them across the galaxy. That decision sent an even stronger message. Humanity did not want conquest. They wanted peace. But they would defend themselves. And they would defend themselves very well. Days later, a new signal spread across the galaxy. It came from Earth, from the center of human civilization. The message was short, simple, clear. Humanity seeks cooperation with all peaceful species. We welcome trade, we welcome diplomacy, but any civilization that attacks human worlds. The message paused for a moment, then the final sentence appeared. We'll learn the same lesson as the Dominion. Across the galaxy, alien leaders watched the message in silence. The battle in the Sol system had changed everything. For centuries, humans had been seen as a young and emotional species. Weak, divided, unimportant. But now the truth was clear. Humans were something very different. They were patient, they were creative, and when threatened, they were extremely dangerous. Far away from Earth, in the capital of the Dominion, the defeated admiral stood before the Dominion High Council. The chamber was silent as the battle recordings played. Human fleets moved with perfect precision across the display. Dominion ships exploded again and again. The council members watched carefully. When the recordings ended, one ancient Dominion leader finally spoke. "You underestimated them." The admiral lowered his head. "Yes." Another council member asked quietly, "What have we learned from this?" The admiral answered honestly, "We attacked the wrong species, and across the galaxy that lesson would never be forgotten. Because the Dominion had celebrated too early, they believed humanity would be easy to conquer. Instead, they had awakened a civilization that had been preparing for war its entire history, a civilization that could defend its home against even the greatest empire. And now the entire galaxy knew the truth. Humanity was not the weakest species among the stars. Humanity might be the one species no one should ever attack.